Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar on exploring new housing laws and ordinances. I'm Melissa Keene. I'm a Senior Program Manager with the Institute for Local Government and will be your host and moderator this afternoon. So today's webinar, here's a quick overview. State laws and regulations pertaining to land use, housing, and development are complex and ever-changing. Today's webinar will provide an update on current housing laws and proposed legislation that will impact local housing development. A quick overview of what we're going to do over the next hour. We have a quick welcome and overview. We're going to talk about setting the stage and do a really quick poll of you all. Then we're going to hear presentations from Gustavo Velasquez, the director of HCD, Sohab Mahmood, a housing policy specialist with HCD, Chris Lee, a legislative representative with the California State Association of Counties, and Jason Ryan, assistant legislative director with the League of California Cities. Then we will have some time for Q&A, and then we'll share our contact information and some upcoming events that might be of interest to you all. You've probably noticed that your line has been muted and will remain muted for the duration of this call due to the size of the audience we have with us today, but that doesn't mean you can't ask us questions. So you should all see a questions box in the control panel of your screen. And you can type questions into that box at any point in time during the webinar as things come up. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, we'll have some time for Q&A towards the end, and we'll take questions throughout the webinar as we have time as well. If you don't get a response to your question today, you can definitely follow up with us after the fact. A little bit about ILG in case you're not familiar with us. We are the nonprofit training and education affiliate of the League of California Cities, the California State Association of Counties, and the California Special Districts Association. We provide practical and easy-to-use resources so local agencies can effectively implement policies on the ground. We do that in a variety of ways. We do a lot of education and training, such as today's webinar. We also provide technical assistance, capacity building, and convening services for local governments statewide. And we do that in a number of different areas. We have a program focused on leadership and governance, which covers the state-mandated trainings, how to operate as an effective council and governance team, of a lot of the legal information that you all need as local officials and staff. We have a program focused on civics education and workforce, which helps create that pipeline to public service and help facilitate municipal school partnerships. We have a program focused on public engagement, which covers a whole host of things from getting started to dealing with difficult meeting participants to embedding public engagement activities into your government operations. And then we have a program focused on sustainable communities, which is what today's webinar is part of. That program focuses on housing. This year we're going to be doing a lot of work around that. Also energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reductions, connecting local governments to cap and trade funding, and a whole host of other things in that space. So as I mentioned, again, these are today's presenters. We've got two representatives from HCD, as well as our affiliates, the League and CSAC, who will share information about the existing framework of housing laws, as well as upcoming legislation that could impact cities and counties' ability to move forward. Before we jump into the presentations, just want to take a minute or two to get a better sense of who all is joining us today. So we have two quick polls to hear from you all where you're from. So hopefully you just saw a poll jump up on your screen, and so we're just curious if you are an elected official, if you're a planning commissioner, you're a city manager or county administrator or staff. Give this just a few seconds here. I see a number of you have already voted. Okay. So you see the results there. The vast majority of you are with a local agency or local agency staff, a number of elected officials on the line, and then you see the breakdown from there. Thank you so much. One other quick poll. So we're curious if you're with a local government, the state government, a consulting or planning firm perhaps, a nonprofit, or other. Just to give us a little bit better sense of who we're talking to today. Perfect, thank you so much. So not surprising, the vast majority of you are with a city, county, or special district. Have a few folks from state government and consulting firms and nonprofits, but thank you. Helps us understand who's in our audience today. Just want to give a big picture frame about ILG and how we connect to this work and why we're here today presenting this webinar. So we are part of the statewide technical assistance team that SOHOP will share a little bit more about in a minute. But that team is comprised of the state, of planning firms and nonprofits, and we're really here to help provide trainings and resources for you all to meet your needs and help reduce barriers to housing development in your communities. This is going to take a few different forms for us at ILG. We're part of, again, the statewide and regional technical assistance, so that we're going out on a regional basis and having meetings with you all to understand the barriers to housing development, what your technical assistance needs are, what training needs you have, what convening needs you have, and we'll be rolling out plans to address those technical assistance needs. We're also in the process of updating our Planning Commissioners Handbook, and there will be companion trainings for those on a regional basis for the planning commissioners that are on the line. And then the third piece of this is the webinar that you're on today. We're going to be hosting a series of webinars for elected officials and local leaders on a number of different housing topics, and we'll share a little bit more about that at the close of this training. So with that, I want to welcome the Director of HCD, Gustavo Velasquez, to provide some welcoming remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first series of elected leaders housing webinars. I saw the poll numbers. I know we have a lot of local agency staff as well, which is great. My name is Gustavo Velasquez, and it's an honor to serve as the director of the state's Department of Housing and Community Development. I'm especially excited to be addressing all of you today. It's great to be in the company of these partners, close partners. I see Chris, Jason. We partner a lot on so many fronts. The Institute for Local Government, CSAC, League of Cities. It's great to be partnering on this effort as well. As elected leaders and local agency staff, and local government officials, you are really the most important partners in California in addressing this unsustainable housing crisis. The state can set the standards, but success or failure ultimately rests at the local level in communities struggling today to meet the housing demands of so many. It is especially important that you become local champions and that you cultivate others to be those champions as well if we are to meet state, regional, and local housing goals. But I'm here primarily to tell you this. HCD is here to help you succeed. That is ultimately the message I want everyone to live with. The State Housing Department is here to help you succeed with resources, technical assistance, education, and most importantly, collaboration. I'm not really talking about the kind of cookie cutter approaches either. As the saying goes, where there is a will, there is a way. And that is my charge to our staff, to help you in every way possible to succeed. Failure is not an option. And as you will learn over the course of these webinars, we're here to provide you with information for your decision making, as well as provide you with knowledge around the tools you can use for policy setting and implementation. We want to hear your concerns and learn from you what you need most, and find common ground as the foundation for addressing this worsening crisis. It has never been more urgent than today. A few data points I feel are important to keep in mind where the going gets tough. During the last decade, housing production in California averaged fewer than 80,000 new homes annually, and ongoing production continues to fall far below the projected 180,000 additional homes that we need to build annually. Homeownership rates are at their lowest since the 1940s. That's just a travesty. This lack of supply and rising costs are compounding the growing inequality and quashing opportunity. and the rent crisis is going from bad to worse. The majority of renters, some 3 million households, have to pay more than 30% of their income toward rent. And nearly one-third of those, some 1.5 million households are paying more than half of their income towards rent. And those are renters. For those experiencing homelessness, it's just a terrible situation. We have nearly 1/4 of the nation's people experiencing homelessness, even though we're only 12-13% of the country's population. That is pre-COVID. Discrimination, inadequate accommodations of those with disabilities are worsening housing costs and affordability challenges. And if the pandemic and wildfires have taught us anything, is that the situation we find ourselves is in fact unsustainable if we continue on this path. Yet, in spite of all of what I believe, I hope, and I hope you believe too, California's housing crisis is solvable, but it will take skill and the will to make it happen. As you will learn from this series of webinars, there is a whole lot going on right now. Last fiscal year, we awarded $2.5 billion in grants and loans, a huge increase, leverage an additional $8.9 billion in local, federal, and private investments. So lots of production happening in spite of how far we still are. As you probably know, California received $2.6 billion from Washington for pandemic-related rental assistance to bring relief to California households believed to be behind in the rent. We're pleased to be working again with our colleagues here on this panel who have, in so many of our local jurisdictions, basically all of our local jurisdictions, who have chosen to work through for the distribution of these funds. Homekey, you've heard of Homekey, perhaps invested $800 million in funds to cities, counties, and tribal governments for interim and permanent housing for those experiencing homelessness and at highest risk of getting COVID. And I commend each and every jurisdiction represented here who responded to the Homekey initiative, just as they responded to the rental assistance program. Our call for, in terms of Homekey, for rehabilitating hotels, motels, and other structures for interim and permanent housing solutions. This effort culminated in more than 6,000 new units of interim and permanent housing to be stood up in record time. I'm also very proud that we were able to partner with jurisdictions in every single region of the state. And by the way, if the governor's budget is approved for 21-22, we expect another $750 million for another round of Homekey. On the planning front, I was especially pleased that we have had over 500 cities and counties apply for our planning grants recently, and that funding for regional approaches is on its way. And for the first time ever, we recorded 97% compliance rate for housing elements in the 5th cycle. 522 out of 539 jurisdictions meeting their standards. Now, I recognize that this new cycle that we're entering in, 6th cycle, will be very challenging. We realize you have a larger number to accommodate future growth. In some instances, double in size, and it's for both the number of units and the effort that will be needed to intensify production in your localities and make it in a way that we are also furthering fair housing and choice for low and moderate income people. But I can assure you that in meeting state law, you are not alone. I pledge we will leave no stone unturned in assisting you, in helping you get across the finish line. I want to close by talking about the role of fair housing and equity very briefly, very briefly. That is a part of the fabric of all that we do here at HCD. I come from a fair housing background. At HUD, I was the Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing, so I'm especially pleased to see that HUD is likely to revive the rule that I worked on with many other colleagues, including some that are here in California, And I believe that as the new HUD kind of revives these fair housing efforts, we will benefit from the technical assistance they will provide. This is an area where we have beefed up our resources to support you and your staff around fair housing in your localities. I hope you will take advantage of all that we have to offer. With that, I just close by saying thank you for taking the time. It's very, very important to see so many local jurisdictions. I know with everything going on, you have a lot on your plate, and then some might thank you for including housing as a top priority, especially for those elected officials that are listening this presentation. Please know that we have an advocate in me as we pursue housing goals together. I have an open door, and so does my staff. And you are, in closing, where the rubber meets the road. You definitely are, and we appreciate the collaboration and the partnership all along the way, again, especially as we enter this critical sixth cycle arena. With that, I'll turn it back to you and to discuss additional technical assistance that HCD provides. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Gustavo. We really appreciate you joining us this afternoon and sharing those remarks on behalf of HCD. We're going to continue to move forward from a state perspective and introduce Soha Mahmood, who is going to share a little bit more about HCD's work.
Great, thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you, Director Velasquez, for that great introduction. And again, if there's anything I want you to take away from this presentation and this webinar, it's that HCD is here to help. And we're going to do everything we can to help local governments address new laws and their arena and help them just meet their overall housing goals. So specifically, just to give you a little overview of HCD, we are made up of, sorry, just making sure the slide deck is running. We are made up of mainly 3 divisions: the Division of Financial Assistance that oversees a lot of our funding programs, the Housing Policy Division, which I represent, and the Codes and Standards Division. Now, within the Housing Policy Division, which we're at, we have a Fair Housing Unit, a Data and Research Unit, a Land Use and Planning Unit, and a Policy and Program Unit. Much of the technical assistance we're going to discuss today is going to be coming out of our Land Use and Planning Unit. Next slide, please. So really quickly, within our Land Use and Planning Unit, one thing is I want you all to know what we do and get really familiar with our team, because we'll be working with all of you directly, hopefully, to help you address your housing planning goals. So our team reviews housing elements for compliance, but in addition to reviewing and issuing compliance, we also provide housing element support. So we can answer any of your questions you have around updating your housing element. We can provide feedback. We can brainstorm through solutions. Again, like I said, our team is hopefully will always be serving in a technical assistance capacity, one where we're always helping you kind of achieve your goals and brainstorm and find solutions to some of the issues you're running into. We also have a formal TA program, Technical Assistance Program. It's formally known as our Technical Assistance Program on Accelerating Housing Production, and I'll be talking about that in detail later in this presentation. We also administer very specific funding programs like the planning grants that Director Velasquez mentioned. So that's SB2, LEAP, and the REAP planning grants. We also have an accountability enforcement unit or function related to complying with housing and planning laws, and also helping local governments comply with housing and planning laws. And lastly, we have a lot of other functions related to ADUs, such as reviewing ordinances and, of course, providing feedback on those ADU ordinances. We work a little bit on preservation topics, APRs, so those are annual progress reports, as well as fair housing topics. Next slide, please. So hopefully now that you've gotten to know a little bit about our team and what we do, we want you all to be aware that we are also very much aware that first, cities and counties have a huge goal ahead of them. You know, the sixth cycle arena, we're well aware that it may have increased exponentially for several local governments across the state, making it so that potentially some local governments may need to rezone for additional housing units in their communities that address all the income levels. Another thing we know is that housing element compliance is becoming increasingly more important, not only because many funding programs are tied to compliance, but because there are more penalties and fines for not having compliance. Now, I know most of us, Probably 100% of us over here know what a housing element is, but just as a reminder, the housing element is an element of the general plan that needs to be updated every 5 to 8 years, depending on what planning cycle you are on. The importance is that the housing element, as we all probably already know, is a key planning document when it comes to addressing the housing needs for individuals, families, seniors, our farm worker populations, families of all income levels, and in general, most of our most vulnerable populations. Also, and as such, given the importance of housing element and compliance with state housing element law, the legislature has passed a suite of policies around compliance since 2017. So this includes tying housing element compliance to funding programs related to housing and other non-housing funding programs, fines through AB 101 statute of 2017, but it also includes, and I want to emphasize this, many different ways HCD can work with cities and counties as much as possible to be compliant with the housing element law as well as other housing planning and land use laws. And lastly, we also know that housing laws are changing every year, especially since 2017. It's a big topic, it's a very important topic, but we also acknowledge that it can be really hard to continually update ordinances and processes to comply with state law, especially if you are a lower resource jurisdiction, or you may not have the subject matter expertise, or may not have the capacity to be updating your ordinances to comply with all of state law. Lastly, we know that these new laws, requirements, and expectations, and just the more pressing need for housing, and we understand that local decision makers may have some very tough decisions ahead of them, and that, as you all know, you may need support in making those decisions. So again, we're hoping today we can show you the suite of tools HCD has and will have to help you make these decisions. Next slide, please. So I talked about what we know, I talked about who we are. Now I want to talk about what we have at HCD to help through these decision-making processes. So again, HCD has a suite of tools and resources to help local governments comply with housing laws, but not just comply with housing laws, also find creative strategies that work for your jurisdiction, whether you be rural or urban, or whether you're more on the northern part of the state, or you're coming from Southern California, or you're representing the San Joaquin Valley. We know that housing laws and strategies may be very different in each region. And so we have a program, and we are going to continue to develop that is completely tailored to your needs. Another thing, so starting with our TA program, which I'll go into, but most importantly, we have points of contact. So at HCD, especially in our division, we have assigned a point of contact for every region or subregion or county across the state, where local governments will have a person to contact depending on the size. They may even have a team of reps that they can contact and work directly with to help implement housing policies and specifically help them update their housing elements. So really what this means is you have somebody at HCD that you can pick up the phone, call, and ask all of your questions, and hopefully get some time to brainstorm through any solutions that you might be trying to work through. Another thing we have is planning grants. So planning grants were implemented from 2017 up until this year. We allocated, as Director Velasquez mentioned, $250 million to roughly 500 plus local governments. And if there's only 539 cities in California, that means roughly 90% of the state received flexible planning funds to be used to implement strategies and policies that focus on accelerating housing production. Lastly, we are going to continue to incentivize and reward local governments who not only comply with housing laws, but go above and beyond housing laws and ensure that housing is being improved through their communities through AB 101. AB 101 established the Pro-Housing Designation Program, which is a way to reward local governments for implementing housing-friendly policies that support development and equitable communities. So Again, this program is designed to reward good actors for enacting policies that are just housing friendly, and ultimately policies that encourage the development of housing. So once a local government receives a pro-housing designation, sometimes I just call it a label or a stamp, they receive bonus points for competitive funding programs, such as AHSC, which stands for Affordable Housing and Sustainability Communities Program, TCC, IIG, which is our infrastructure grant program, and they get competitive points for being a pro-housing locality, therefore becoming more competitive when asking for that funding. So right now, HCD is currently working on the emergency regulations, which will set forth the process where that lays out how a city or county can gain a pro-housing designation. Categories of pro-housing policies, so things that you want to make sure you're hitting to become a pro-housing jurisdiction, includes favorable zoning policies, decreased timeframes to approve permits, reducing construction and development costs, and providing financial subsidies for affordable housing. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to go into detail on something I mentioned a couple times already, which is our TA program on accelerating housing production. This is the same program that is working with ILG to bring this webinar series to all of you. So this program is very broad, very flexible, and will be regionally tailored. So the state is not applying a one-size-fits-all, but rather with the focus on understanding local government's needs when it comes to housing planning and implementation, and then finding and creating the resources to help address those needs. So this program covers everything from how do I properly rezone and upzone to also make sure I'm in compliance with state laws? What best practices are there when it comes to developing objective design standards? What tools are there when working with specific groups of people who are opposing certain ordinances, plans, or even affordable housing developments? Our goal is to implement this program that helps local governments address local barriers to producing and planning for housing. If this sounds kind of vague or general, it's supposed to be, and the reason why is because we wanted to make sure this program is so flexible that we can tailor it to each region based on their needs. Again, the emphasis here is that we know every region is not the same. And while challenges may be similar, we know how you are going to be implementing housing policies and strategies will range and be very different from one part of the state to another part of the state. So we wanted to make sure we're developing a program that really fits your needs, and rather just the state coming in and just applying a one-size-fits-all and hope it works out. So the TA team, as mentioned, you're probably wondering what is HCD's relationship with a lot of the teams that are online today and also will be on the line in the future. And so what we're doing is to ensure that we're bringing in all the subject matter experts, ranging from zoning to public education to outreach to CEQA to affordable housing financing, and making sure our team is large enough to meet 539 cities and counties' needs. HCD, in coordination with OPR, that's the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, has contracted with PlaceWorks, who leads a group of teams and consulting firms, including ILG, to help HCD and support HCD as we implement this work. So as you can see, our team is made up of several different planning firms focused on rural versus urban communities, firms who have strong relationships with communities across the state, and firms that specialize in a variety of different topic areas. Next slide, please. So hopefully by now you're wondering, okay, so Hob, so what can this program really give me? So this is just a small list, I promise you, just a small list of the topics or focus areas that this program will provide local government support on. It starts with public education, like this webinar, training for cities, counties, and the public, as well as campaigns around housing. It also is going to include regional TA plans. So these plans are going to be drafted entirely by the local governments in that region, and is going to determine how that region would like to see technical assistance over the next couple years. So in a way, it's a delivery mechanism for HTD to get TA to that region. It also is going to, of course, include planning grant TA, statewide tools and resources, such as toolkits, fact sheets on new laws, different housing policy strategies. It will most definitely include TA on applying and implementing pro-housing policies. It's going to be including TA on the 6-cycle arena. So everything from updating your housing element to helping you with the rezoning, opportunity mapping will also be including housing parcel templates. This program will also include just TA generally around emerging legislative housing and land use strategies that are coming our way, and specific TA and assistance on implementing key housing policy areas that are academically known to have an effect on housing production. So that includes rezoning land to permit for by right or as of right development, expedited processing of permits, CEQA, objective design and development standards, and specific plans. Next slide. So hopefully you're wondering by now, okay, this is all great, all sounds wonderful, we need all of this TA, how does this actually work? So to give you a quick overview, this program was originally developed in 2017. It was funded through this SB2 planning grants. And at the time, the priority was to help local governments with applying for the planning grants funding. And the same thing went for LEAP and REAP. Our focus was to help local governments access that funding source. Now that over 500 local governments have accessed the planning grants funds, we're looking into developing an ongoing TA approach. So that means that, again, because no region is the same, we'll be developing regionally tailored technical assistance plan, which is one, going to include the region's priorities when it comes to housing, and two, it's going to include what resources, tools, or toolkits is a region requesting and how HCD is going to accommodate those needs and how HCD is going to deliver those requests. And lastly, I just want to let you know that right now in the process, our team is working on finalizing those tailored TA plans for up to 40 to 50 subregions. So we do not miss a single region. And if you were a large region, let's say like SCAG, Southern California Association for Governments, we broke you up into subregions, or we worked with the individual COGs within SCAG across the state. And so our goal is to start deploying a lot of these TA resources in late spring. So most likely, hopefully by next month. And this is, oh, next slide, please. And then this is just an overview of what type of tools are coming out in just the next couple weeks and what tools will be upcoming. So we have toolkits around objective design and development standards, checklists on AFFH, that's affirmatively furthering fair housing, as well as on public engagement. We're going to have this local elected officials training that's going to run most likely until October. We're also going to have planning commissioners handbooks and trainings as well. In addition, ILG put out a housing engagement toolkit. And upcoming, so a lot of the tools that will be upcoming will be based on what is identified in these regional TA plans, but generally we'll have toolkits and workshops on all the different pro-housing policies, fact sheets and handouts to be used at city council meetings on the various new laws, clearinghouse on best practices, more handouts related to the housing element. We'll be launching social media as well as traditional media campaigns around housing, and that will include an education strategy, rezoning outreach programs, and I promise you this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. There's going to be a lot of different tools and resources coming out of this program, but it will be mainly based out of these regional TA plans and what local governments are asking for. And with that, that is my closing. Again, if there's anything I want you to take from this presentation, it's that we at HCD are here to help, and we are looking to hear from all of you and see what you need that HCD can provide to help you implement a lot of these new housing laws and housing strategies. And I will hand it back over to Melissa.
Great, thank you so much, Sohab. I'd like to pause just for a couple minutes and take a couple of the questions that we've seen come in before we jump into Jason and Chris's presentation. A few questions. First, is there any update on the distribution of the LEAP funds? So is there a way that a jurisdiction can check on the status of their application or when they should be receiving those funds?
Sure, absolutely. So if you are a jurisdiction and you've applied for LEAP funds and you're wondering where it is, just email us. That's the best way I can look up where it is at in our system. So if you email us at earlyactionplanning@hcd.ca.gov, I'll let Melissa or one of us will drop it in the chat and let us know what jurisdiction you are, and we'll be happy to look that up for you.
Perfect. Is there also a place that jurisdictions can find out who their regional HCD contact is? Is that information on the website, or is there somewhere they can find that information?
I would say email the same email address. I'm on the other end of it, so you just be talking to me anyways. And I can just let me know what jurisdiction you are, and then I can go ahead and let you know who your contact is.
Perfect. And just to clarify, so all of the existing tools and the upcoming tools that you just mentioned, those will all be on the Housing Hub site. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. You can find the Housing Hub site on HCD's website under the TA page. We will also link that as probably follow-up to this webinar.
Yes. So all of the emails and websites that we're talking about right now, we'll make sure to include, we'll drop them in the chat during the webinar, but then we'll also include them in the follow-up email that you all will receive with the recording and slide deck of this presentation, so you can have all of that information in one place. do one more quick question. Is there anywhere that folks can go to find out the number of tenants that were assisted through Project HomeKey per jurisdiction? So is that information captured anywhere?
That information is captured. I will have to find out where, unless Paul McDougall knows exactly where. Otherwise, like I said, you can just email us and we're happy to send you that information.
Okay. So keep dropping your questions in the Q&A box. Oh, Director Velasquez, do you have? No. Okay.
No. I was just gonna say that actually today, April 1st, is the due date for a legislative mandated report on HomeKey, where we have to provide all the statistics of, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, units, beneficiaries, all of that. And so we have to send that report to the legislature first, and then it will be made publicly available on our website. So I say by about 5 to 10 days, you may be able to see and read for your particular jurisdiction what are the statistics on HomeKey.
Perfect. So great timing on that question. So stay tuned for more on that front. Perfect. Okay. So continue to drop questions in the questions box as you have them, and we will get to some additional questions after we hear from Jason and Chris. So with that, let me go ahead and get back to the slide deck and we can keep going. Jason and Chris, turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Again, this is Jason Ryan with the League of California Cities. I'm our Assistant Legislative Director. I'm one of our 6 lobbyists. I work on housing, land use, and economic development. Chris Lee, also with CSAC. He's going to be participating in this panel with me. We're going to go back and forth as we go through the various bills. We're hoping to save enough time at the end to take some questions. We'll try to cover them quickly. Hopefully we can get through all of our slides. We do have quite a few. The legislature is very active again this year when it comes to housing and land use bills. It seems like, we talked, still have talked a lot about all the bills we've seen over the years. This year is no different. I mean, we have dozens upon dozens of bills related to housing and land use that we are working on. Both of our organizations are working on different capacities. This year, the legislature introduced right around 2,400 bills, which is on par with the 10-year average. So again, there's just lots and lots of bills to go through. So you're going to be hearing a lot of both of our organizations throughout this year. Sample letters will be provided. We'll have action alerts and other items going out to our membership or our cities throughout the state. So you'll be hearing a lot about housing policy this year for sure. And with that, we'll go ahead and dive right into some of the bills. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to start. We're going to cover a few reintroductions from 2020. Last year, of course, when COVID hit, we saw many bills get sidelines. Hundreds upon hundreds of bills were not acted upon. So this year, there are a number of bills that have been reintroduced, and the legislature is going to focus on them again. As you can see here, SB 6 and AB 11 or 11.5 or 115, these are bills that really deal with commercial zones, retail zones, and allowing for housing to be constructed in those areas. The bills take a little bit different approaches, but nonetheless, they're very similar, and that they would require every city and county in the state to allow for housing to be constructed in all of their commercial and retail zones, as long as they're not adjacent to an industrial site. AB 115 has an affordability component of 20%, but nonetheless, we'd all have to do it and allow for it in those zones if a developer chooses so. Next slide. The next item you see here is SB 115 by Senator Portantino. This is a reintroduction as well. We supported this bill last year. It's a really good bill that looks at idle retail sites, and it creates this new incentive for our cities and counties to rezone those and to allow for housing on them. It'll set up an account. Unfortunately, there's no money in the account yet. We're certainly going to be trying to get funding in it in the budget this year, but it would have HCD administer the program. And basically our cities or local governments could access these funds and then, help revitalize those. We're looking really at big boxes, retailers that have gone out of businesses, your Sears, your JCPenney's, finding a way to revitalize those and bring, housing to fruition, which is something that's important to all of us. So we're hopeful this can get funded and cities will have that incentive at the approach. Next one.
Again, Chris Lee with the California State Association of Counties. I'll cover this one. Another reintroduction from 2020. This bill last year was SB 1120 by Senator Atkins. The version that was introduced this year is nearly identical, with the exception of a little provision about coastal development permits if you're in the coastal zone here. But the concept behind SB 9 is really kind of this gentle density idea of taking areas that are restricted currently for single family zoning and allowing some densification. Similar to the ADU approach that's proven to be successful in a lot of jurisdictions at increasing kind of that small scale infill. But I'd say the big difference here is that it's actually allowing property owners to split their parcels in two. So you could do a duplex on one property basically by right, or do the lot split and get up to 4 units that way. There's also some interaction with the accessory dwelling unit requirements. But again, as local jurisdictions have been exploring ways to kind of densify existing single family neighborhoods, we're seeing the state look at tools like this as well to expedite that process. Next slide.
Okay, on this slide, we have a couple of bills, AB 68 and AB 989. There are two bills that are very similar. They're attacking the issue in a little bit of a different way, but basically both of these bills would establish this new Housing Appeals Committee that would be housed over an HCD. And then really the role of that entity would be to, at least from the League of California Cities perspective, really is to second guess a city's action when they decide to deny or condition a development. And if the developer believes that the conditions that have been placed on that project, if they are excessive and will not allow the project to move forward, or it's economically infeasible, this appeals board could then override that local decision to deny that project or condition it. The big deal for us here is that this is not a court. This is not a judge making this determination. It's not looking at it through the lens of the Housing Accountability Act. This is really a new body that's going to be, again, housed over at HCD that would make that determination. And this is something that we're certainly opposed to and going to be working a lot on this year. But it's something that we definitely recommend you take a close look at. And from our perspective, it's certainly something that if there's an issue around an improper denial or conditioning, that needs to be looked at in the courts, not an appeals board that's not really accountable to anybody, other than perhaps the governor and some of the appointees that he's placed on that body. Next slide.
And it was mentioned a little bit earlier, but I mean, with the historic wildfires that we've been seeing over the last several years in California, planning related to wildfire safety, especially as related to housing development, has been a big theme. And so a couple of different approaches that have been introduced in the legislature already. The two that are on this slide, SB 55 by Senator Stern and AB 1295 by Assemblymember Muratsuchi, both take sort of a pretty strong approach, really saying we're going to put very tight limits on approval of development in kind of the highest fire hazard severity zones. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the regulatory side in this space as well. The Board of Forestry is implementing regulations coming out of a bill from 2019 by Senator Dodd. So while these legislative approaches are concerning to a lot of counties who have a lot of communities that are really, largely within these sort of fire hazard areas, what does sort of sustainability look like in those neighborhoods? We're also looking at these regulatory approaches that are happening at the Board of Forestry level. If we could go to the next slide. So kind of similar, taking I think a little bit more nuanced approach than the other two bills we discussed. We have SB 12 by Senator McGuire, which also really tightens standards to approve development in areas that have higher fire risk. It requires a lot more frequent updates of the safety element and hazard mitigation plans that go along with those updates, as well as requires when agencies are going to approve development in areas with higher risk, that they really make some findings and use all the best available information about mitigation strategies and things of that nature. This is also a bill that was introduced last year in a pretty similar version by Senator Hannah Beth Jackson, who's since termed out, but it's one we're watching closely, both on the legislative front as well as these regulations moving at the Board of Forestry on a parallel track. I think next slide.
Yep. Okay, the next bill here, AB 1401 by Assemblywoman Friedman. This deals with parking requirements around residential and commercial developments. This is a bill that would prohibit local governments from imposing any sort of minimum parking standard or enforcing their parking standards on residential, commercial, and other developments if that development is within 1/2 mile walking distance of public transit. That would include, some bus lines that operate on high frequency, major transit stops. If it's within 1/2 mile of any of those locations, we couldn't impose any sort of minimum parking standard. It would also apply to these low vehicle miles traveled areas or low VMT areas. Again, completely restricting the local government's ability to impose parking standards, particularly along the entire route of a bus stop. So we certainly have major concerns with this measure. And again, I would encourage you to take a look at it, AB 1401. Next slide.
We saw some questions popping up in the chat about, the cost of infrastructure improvements, the cost of land, and talking about tools for local agencies to attempt to cost and promote affordable housing development. And so a bill, again, this is one that has been introduced before. It had some trouble getting the 2/3 vote that was needed to get it off the assembly floor last time, is back in a slightly different version. So Assembly Constitutional Amendment 1 by Assemblymember Aguiar Curry would reduce the current 2/3 voter threshold approval requirement for these special, this is for bonded indebtedness, but for dedicated local infrastructure and acquisition of property to support housing development. So it's a 2/3 vote in the legislature, and then because this is a constitutional amendment, it would actually have to go to a statewide vote. And so the voters would have to say, yes, we authorize local agencies to put these measures on the ballot and have them approved by a lower voter margin than is currently required under existing law. But we still think, this was done for school bonds, reduced to the 55% voter approval threshold a couple decades ago, and it's proven helpful. But again, a few more steps both to get this authority on the ballot, and then doesn't automatically provide you the option. You still have to go to your local voters and have them approve it by that 55% threshold. But still, it's a recognition that some of these costs, these infrastructure costs and land acquisition costs, are difficult for local agencies to deal with without additional tools from the state. Next slide.
Okay, so the next item we have here is SB 5. This is a housing bond that's being put forward by Assemblywoman Senator Atkins. She's our President Pro Tem over there. It's a $6.5 billion bond. That's about 1.5 times the last bond that we saw a few years ago. The items that it's going to fund have not been specified yet in the bond. This is something that the Senator is going to work on over the next year or so. The legislature doesn't need to take action on the bond and actually pass it off of either House's floor until next year. Really, it's June 5th, June 17th, around that time frame where the legislature would have to act of next year in order to place it on the ballot. So there's going to be a lot of work ahead on this one. But again, a $6.5 billion bond is a big deal. It would fund, hopefully, the traditional programs that the prior bonds have funded that have been very successful, and our cities and counties have accessed those funds to get much needed affordable housing constructed. The infill infrastructure grant program, additional infrastructure dollars would certainly be warranted. So this is a great idea, and we're hopeful that it'll be outlined here shortly and specifics will be brought into the measure. Next, Bill.
We're going to walk through a few bills on homelessness. Obviously, a huge crisis at the center of attention, I think, of voters and local officials all over the state. And so first want to talk about a proposal linked to providing new ongoing funding resources. We've seen over the last 3 approved budgets, these one-time allocations to cities, to counties, to continuums of care, last year to Project Home Key, of resources that are intended to address the homelessness crisis. But I think as local agencies are standing up programs and services and shelters, we are very worried about the ongoing costs to how do we continue to provide those services and housing options, frankly. And so AB 71 by Assemblymember Luz Rivas would generate about $2.4 billion a year. It's a tax it's basically a corporate entity tax And it would fund a variety of things from capital construction, supportive services, and then something that's important for kind of the long-term viability of new affordable housing, providing some rental assistance. So it helps people both who aren't going to go into a subsidized unit, who were able to find a unit in the, the outside market, but also helps provide ongoing rents that support affordable housing projects. So next slide. In addition to the funding piece that's out there, both in the budget conversation, again, as the director mentioned, the governor's proposed an additional $750 million for a variety of investments in homelessness. There's a big interest in the legislature in accountability and planning and regional coordination on homelessness. So AB 816 by Assemblymember Chu, if you're recognizing a theme, this was also a bill that was introduced last year. It was AB 3269 last year. The idea here is really to promote coordination between counties, cities, and continuums of care in every county across the state to do a gaps analysis on what would it take to make progress on homelessness. What are the services? What are the housing units? What's sort of the plan? In addition to that, there's also an accountability and enforcement component that we're very interested in working out and ensuring that you're holding local jurisdictions accountable for things that are within their budgets and within their control. And so that there's kind of a two-sided coin here. Really, we think it's a great idea to do the gaps analysis, but we're worried about the enforcement side. If we don't have the revenue, as we discussed in the previous slide, to do the ongoing increases in services that are required, and then making sure there's accountability for all the different responsibilities, ranging from behavioral health interventions that might be required for some people experiencing homelessness, to just the units and the siting of new housing projects and all the other multifaceted issues that have helped contribute to the homelessness crisis in California. Next slide, please. And then again, AB 1372 by Muratsuchi. This is a pretty interesting bill. This would kind of line up on the side of more of a mandate rather than the funding or the collaborative sort of planning efforts from the prior bill. But this is a pretty prescriptive right to temporary shelter, creates a lot of new responsibilities for cities and counties. Actually, I think one of the potential issues with this bill is looking at things like the supportive services and mental health and who's responsible for providing those and how we fund them. But this is similar to some approaches that we've heard discussed in the past. And so this is one, from CSAC's perspective, we really prefer the sort of collaborative planning approach, making sure people have both funding, clearer lines of responsibility and accountability. But again, this is a significant proposal that we'll be closely reviewing. And back to Jason for the next slide.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. We're down to our last couple slides, and then we'll have a little bit of time for some questions. This one right here is SB 809 by Senator Allen. It's multi-jurisdictional regional agreements. The bill would basically authorize cities and counties to satisfy a portion of their RHNA number and by exchanging it with another jurisdiction and then providing some sort of resources to that other jurisdiction to make sure that those units actually get constructed. So it's a little bit of a cap and trade system, if you will, that local jurisdictions could enter into. This is a measure we're going to be taking a close look at if it moves out of the first committee here in the next few weeks. The next slide, please. And then I believe this is our last item before we do some Q&A is ACA 7 by Muratsuchi. This is a constitutional amendment that would require a 2/3 vote in the legislature in order to put it onto the ballot, and then voters would then have to approve it. But basically what this bill does is that it would better protect local land use authority at the local level from future state interventions. It's something that we're going to be looking at very closely. I'm sure we're going to be supporting this and as we move forward. It's certainly an idea that we support as far as empowering our local electeds to make those decisions at the local level that they feel are best for their community. And then this would resolve many of the conflicts that we see with the state, and as new state laws take effect that may infringe upon our local land use authority, this would better protect that authority. And with that, I think we have, about 5 minutes or so for some Q&A, and I'll hand it back on over to Melissa.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, so we've had a number of questions come in, so we'll get to a few of these and then apologize if we don't get to your question, but definitely feel free to follow up with us afterwards. So there's a few questions around financing mechanisms for a number of these bills, particularly around SB 6 and AB 115. Are there any financing mechanisms associated with either of those?
Yeah, with those two bills, no. There's no funding associated, or really there's been no talk of funding for either one of those bills. You know, the Portantino bill, SB 15, yes, there's a future appropriation potentially. That's what we're going to be working on the state budget to help get some dollars put into that bill. But unfortunately, the other two are really just a mandate on us approving projects within those commercial and retail zones, but no funding to help either address impacts in the community or fund, say, affordable housing in that development.
Yeah, and I'll just offer a editorial comment on those. A lot of our focus over the last several years has been, if we want to hold cities and counties accountable for approving developments that are consistent with plans that have gone through the full community process, that's one thing. And I think we've come to the table and negotiated on those. I think what we're starting to see now is these bills that are saying, okay, notwithstanding what the local housing element or zoning is, we want to allow this over here. And that's where we kind of start the conversation of, okay, well, can we use those sites to help us comply with our housing element requirements? What are the implications? There's commercial zoning in county world can authorize a lot of uses that are not necessarily good neighbors for housing. So it's an interesting trend that we're seeing, but there's definitely some concerns with it on our part.
There's a kind of a clarifying question. I think some folks are trying to figure out how they can kind of track the progress of these bills. So is there a good place for them to go to figure out, when they go into committee or come out of committee or will be voted on the floor or anything like that?
So I'll pitch our, counties.org. If you go to the legislative tracking, there's a link on there and you can see all the bills that the Housing, Land Use, and Transportation Committee is tracking. As Jason mentioned, there's a lot, but, looking to our publications, as well as just going to the legislature's website, leginfo.legislature.ca.gov, and you can find the status. Also notice that all the bills that we are discussing here, it was another question that was asked, these are all bills that have just been introduced. So we're very early in the legislative process this year, but as you can see, there's some themes that are starting to pop up, and obviously no shortage of different ideas.
Yeah, and Jason, the league has a similar. Oh, sorry, go ahead. You were going to say something.
Yeah. So we have a very similar system to what Chris was mentioning. You certainly can go to our website. You can use our tracking system. You'll be able to find all, any bill that we're tracking is in that system. Any letter we've written, sample letters that are all included in that as well. And as Chris indicated, we're really early in the legislative cycle. Some committees haven't even met yet. They're just getting underway. So you'll see some letters up there already, but you're going to see a lot more in the coming, week, 10 days as we get those letters in for that first policy committee and maybe the second policy committee. So, and you can also look to our publications as well. We do weekly newsletters and we'll feature some of these bills. And we have additional webinars planned in April and in June to go over legislation. So there'll be lots of opportunity for folks to interact with us. And then my final plug would be for our regional managers. We have 16 regional managers around the state. They are your direct line to the League of California Cities, and they are very knowledgeable and up to speed about all of these measures. So if you have questions, you can ask them, and they'll refer them to us, and we can get all your questions answered.
Perfect. I'd love to get through maybe one or two more questions, but in the interest of folks that may have to jump off, I'm going to go ahead and put up our contact information as well so folks can follow up with us as needed. But we do have a lot more questions, so I'd love to get to maybe one or two more. Is there any movement at the state level to make ADUs count towards RHNA goals?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Jason. You want to take it?
No, go right ahead. I was going to say you're the person who knows this firsthand. We've had many conversations about this, so please.
I was going to say ADU, the development and building permits of ADUs do count towards RHNA. They do count towards 6-cycle RHNA. You can absolutely use them. We would just want to work with you to figure out the calculation. So how many ADUs are you assuming to use towards your RHNA? HCD has been doing some work on creating some assumptions that are safe to use for a jurisdiction. But depending on the COG that you're a part of, there are some COGs like ABAG and SCAG, especially, who are also doing calculations on what's a safe assumption to use when when counting ADUs towards RHNA, based on market trends, based on what they're seeing, based on past building permits, as well as new legislation. So if you are trying to figure that out, just please contact us directly. Again, Melissa will drop that email in the chat, and then we'll be happy to help you out.
Let's maybe close. We've got a few questions around kind of collaborative efforts and the COG role. So is there any, do you guys have any thoughts on how to best facilitate some of that regional collaboration, or what you see the role of our regional agencies and COGs in some of these efforts?
Yeah, well, I could just speak to the technical assistance plan. For us, COGs are vital for the development of these TA plans. You know, for some of the regions, as COGs, you guys know your jurisdiction's the best. And so we've been working as much as we can with all of the COGs to work to then get to your jurisdictions, to get feedback on the development of these regional TA plans, to be sitting in your monthly planning director meetings. And we're happy to help out with COGs if they also want to be part of the TA plan effort, and we can kind of work together and create that collaboration. So for us, COGs are vital. Please contact us directly. I think we've been in contact with every COG in the state, but if not, please let us know, because you guys are a really important piece of developing these TA plans.
Jason, I know you already made a plug for your regional managers, but any other thoughts on how cities and or counties could either work together or work together regionally to help meet some of these goals and move these processes forward?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when it really starts at the regions, and especially when it comes to housing and our RHNA numbers. So we have to work collaboratively with our neighboring cities, with their counties, with the COG, and you know, the technical assistance that's available out there is really, really important. So I have hit it right on the head. I mean, it's there. We got to take advantage of it. Let's work together on getting, you know, housing built in our regions. It helps all of us as we all build out housing. The more we can get built in the region, the better it is for everybody. So yeah, definitely work collaboratively with your region.
Perfect. So we are a few minutes over time, so I don't want to hold anybody hostage here. I just want to give a really quick plug for the rest of the webinars in this series. So we will be holding these monthly. They're all going to be free. You see the topics that we've got coming up there and the URL to get more information about each of those webinars and timing and things like that. The next one up on the list is actually going to be the COVID-related one. We're going to talk about rental and mortgage assistance, tenant protection, and other things of that nature that you all really implemented to navigate to keep your residents housed during the COVID pandemic, and what are the lessons learned and strategies to move forward there. So please feel free to check these out on our website and sign up for any that are of interest to you. We'll put this one back up just in case you guys want to connect with us after the fact. Again, apologize for not being able to get through all of the questions. With this size of a group, it was just really challenging to get to hold enough time to have everybody's questions answered. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And with that, I just want to thank you to our panelists, HCD and CSAC and the League, for joining us and sharing their experience and expertise with us this afternoon, and for all of you joining us. Sohab, Jason, or Chris, any final comments before we let everybody go?
Nothing from me. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, and have a great afternoon.